You talked about the scrutiny that comes your way when you or anyone who's the first of something or the only something in leadership positions, and the impact that it has on the way that you yourself need to act, the way that you need to conduct yourself, and so on. Is the scrutiny still there?
Every time you open the paper, every time you turn on the news and there's someone who's the first woman or the first person of color to do something, it still gets a lot of attention. And I look forward to the day when that's no longer the storyline, when it's just normative to have people who represent different backgrounds and different perspectives and different ideas and even different ideologies to be seen as a normative part of the ecosystem of leadership.
What you said for me was that if something were to go wrong, then it has implications for a lot of people like me or who belong to that kind of a category that's out there. That's a big burden, right? What would you tell for somebody who's feeling that pressure?
You keep building on those moments of success.
Right.
You know how to assume a new leadership position.
Right.
Even if you don't know everything, you have learned along the way how to ask the right questions, how to gain the support of people that you will need to help you navigate in those circumstances. You know, as the world is becoming increasingly isolated, business schools and research universities have a particularly important role to play to help tether us to one another. And I think the ISB Wharton, Kellogg, LBS partnership is just one example of that. Research and scholarship and the insights that come from that work fuel the ideas that create industry, the ideas that go into policy decision across governments. And a lot of that work happens at institutions like ours. And so when we can come together as faculty and as scholars to do that work, I think it's increasingly important for the development of all society.
It's a pleasure and honor for us to host the Dean of the Wharton School, Erika James. She's been the Dean at the Wharton School for 4 years. Prior to that, she was the Dean at the Goizueta School of Business at Emory University. And before that, she's had a stellar career as a scholar of a whole host of important issues, starting with diversity, inclusion, and written some very important papers on crisis. Welcome, Dean James. Thank you for being here and for agreeing to do this with us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
In your address after the first 3 months at Wharton, the first 90 days, you said something that even now I think about it and I think it's very deep, and I'd like to unpack it a little. You talked about the scrutiny that comes your way when you or anyone who's the first of something or the only something and in leadership positions. The scrutiny that comes your way and the impact that it has on the way that you yourself need to act, the way that you need to conduct yourself, and so on. Is the scrutiny still there?
My thinking around being the first has evolved over a couple of decades because it feels as if almost every opportunity that I've had professionally, I've either been the first or the only. And it wasn't until I became a dean that I started to feel the pressure associated with being the first or the only. There are eyes watching you. There are people wanting you to succeed and are waiting for you to do something magnificent to help support the identity groups that you represent. And then there are people who might be waiting for you to fail. And they have not seen a woman or a person of color hold a leadership position like some of the ones that I've held before. And so I think the scrutiny that I experience is, do they think I can handle this? Do they think I can be successful in this environment? Because there's not been any previous example of that. And I felt in those early days of being a dean, the pressure of what it means to be a role model, but also the pressure of what it means if I potentially fail. Will anyone else like me ever get a shot again if I am not successful? Interestingly, when I became the dean of the Wharton School, when I was appointed dean, when I was announced dean, it was February of 2020, so the pandemic had not yet hit. And all of the attention was the first woman dean of the Wharton School, the first person of color of the Wharton School. But by the time I started in July of 2020, the pandemic was in full force. And the attention was not on me, but the attention was on the school and every institution around the world and how we were grappling with that. And as a new leader, I needed to come in and focus squarely on what were we going to do to navigate the Wharton School and for me to help navigate the University of Pennsylvania through a period of incredible tumult. So in that regard, I would say the pressure has now lessened because I'm 4 years in. I have established somewhat of a track record of success. And I haven't gotten everything right, but I've done enough things right that I think it's not a novelty for me to be in this role right now. But I will still say, every time you open the paper, every time you turn on the news and there's someone who's the first woman or the first person of color to do something, it still gets a lot of attention. And I look forward to the day when that's no longer the storyline, when it's just normative to have people who represent different backgrounds and different perspectives and different ideas and even different ideologies to be seen as a normative part of the ecosystem of leadership.
So let me ask a further follow-up question. So one of them, and it's very pertinent now, given what's happening in the world and in American politics also, what's happening there. But the pressure that you're talking about, right? That kind of a pressure that people take upon themselves, because it's what you said for me was that if something were to go wrong, then it has implications for a lot of people like me or who belong to that kind of a category that's out there. That's a big burden, right? It's a really big burden for people to bear. So, and because you've successfully navigated it, you've had success wherever you've gone. What would you tell for somebody who's feeling that pressure? What would you tell them? What would your advice to them be?
I've had an opportunity to talk with many people about this exact question. And what I have come to learn and realize is two things. One, we're no longer at a stage where we can put people in positions that haven't earned them and that don't have the competence and the ability to do well in those roles. When you talk about being the dean of the Wharton School, it is among the most influential academic jobs in the world. And no one is going to make the choice to put someone that they don't believe can actually be successful in that job. And I am the one that had to internalize that understanding, right? Because so much of the pressure that I felt was pressure that I put on myself, not that necessarily other people were saying things that made me feel less than or made me feel like I needed to prove myself. So part of the advice I give to young people is recognize, differentiate between what you're telling yourself and what you're actually hearing from those around you.
Right.
And I think the other key part is to recognize and to reflect on your track record, right? You have had many moments of success, right, and you keep building on those moments of success.
Right.
And that is the evidence that you know how to assume a new leadership position.
Right.
Even if you don't know everything, you have learned along the way how to ask the right questions, how to gain the support of people that you will need to help you navigate in those circumstances. So pay attention to your own self-talk and then always reflect on the fact that you've had a track record of success to date, which will very likely continue into the future.
You also learned how to bring people along because you also learned through this process that you need people to get used to certain ideas and then bring them along. So that's a very important skill set. That's part of your armory because of who you are and because of what people's expectations were, right?
For me, I'm a psychologist. My PhD is in organizational psychology, and I've always been fascinated with understanding human behavior and why people do the things that they do. And I think that particular perspective, even in a business context, has been helpful as a leader, where I recognize that I need to seek the best talent. And oftentimes, the best talent are not the people necessarily who are in the most elevated positions within an organization, but that there's really important talent throughout all levels of the institution. And it's my responsibility to spot that talent and know how to position them to be in roles where they can showcase all of the skills that they come to bring in the organization. And when I have surrounded myself with people who have the kind of talent, the skill set, the capabilities that are important for what I'm trying to achieve for the institution, that's when I have found the most success, not only for me, but for the organization.
Right.
So I think talent development is absolutely critical.
As you're saying, you also live your research, you live your training. There's a paper that you wrote way back where you talked about the discount that stakeholders have and shareholders. In that particular case, it was shareholders. When women leaders are announced to take over public companies. Is it still true, you think?
So we have not gone back to redo that particular study. The thing that is true is there continues to be a paltry number of women leaders, both in US organizations, but also, quite frankly, around the world. So that is still evidence that there is work to be done. I think it probably would suggest that there is some trepidation of putting women in those significant leadership roles. It's quite unfortunate. I will say that the other thing that we found, though, is that the immediacy of the discount when a woman leader is appointed as CEO, for example, happens very much in the short term, and then it rebounds relatively quickly. So that's the part of the paper that didn't get as much attention because the immediate discount was so alarming.
Yeah.
I would imagine, again, because we've not seen a particularly meaningful increase in the number of women leaders, that the impact is still the same, that there will be an immediate decline or discount, but that it will resurface once people become more acclimated to the idea.
Right. In one of the programs, you'd made the statement about diversity, because we're talking about talents, you're talking about people coming from different backgrounds, people coming in with different mindsets, all of that having a very positive impact on the way that organizations are. And what you said was that part of the reason why we don't see a lot of people, a lot of diversity in organizations, because it's just not a priority for organizations. They might say it, but they've not prioritized it. Mm-hmm. As a leader, you're doing it now at Wharton. But what would you tell people? What are the things that they need to do to make that a priority, so that we don't sit 20 years later, we're sitting here again and we're saying there are too few women leaders, there are too few leaders from these different backgrounds for us to say anything really hugely meaningful about the impact that they're having. So what should they be doing?
So let me first preface my response to what people should be doing with the notion that I don't believe, by and large, that people are intentionally trying to prevent women or other minority groups from advancing in the organization. Maybe at one point, decades ago, that might have been the case. I don't think, by and large, people are intentionally trying to prevent other groups from assuming those roles. But I will say that there are aspects of human nature that have perpetuated the same kinds of people from having the same kinds of opportunities over and over again.
Right.
And when I talk about they're not prioritizing opportunities for others, it's not that they're disinterested in that. I think it's, in some cases, it really is subconscious, a lack of awareness that the policies, the practices, the systems, the norms of behavior within an organization are creating an environment that continues to perpetuate itself. And so the priority is to do the hard work of understanding what are the underlying issues, what are the subconscious issues, what are the cultural norms that are allowing that perpetuation. And that's hard. It's hard to recognize because it's subconscious. So we don't even know it's happening until someone calls it out. We don't even know it's happening until we actually go back and look at the data within our organizations over an extended period of time. And then you have to counter those norms, those policies, those practices with different norms and policies and practices. Sometimes that work takes a long time. And because it takes a long time, leaders tend to advance pretty quickly and they move on. And so the work has to start over when new people come on board. And so it's this really insidious cycle, not necessarily because people are wanting to prevent others from advancing, but
Right.
the work is hard. And when you've got to respond to shareholders, when you've got to respond to other stakeholders who have immediate concerns,
Right.
these kinds of issues, I think, take a back burner.
Right. What you're saying is that even well-intentioned people who bring about a change in these norms, who understand it, who change policy, who try to change norms, they move on, and organizations might just go back to being the way they were. So the institutionalization of these new ways of conduct is what is challenging for a lot of organizations. That's the really hard work.
Yes.
I guess that just requires all levels of an organization to have it.
It has to stick, which
Right.
means it cannot just be the mandate or the desire of the person at the top, but
Right.
it has to filter down throughout the organization to really create the new culture of that institution.
Right.
And that oftentimes you're in a leadership role, you've been in leadership roles for a while, you know that takes
A lot.
a lot of time.
Right. The leader can lead in by way of thinking through what these policies need to be and these norms. But the real work for the leader is to try and convince a lot of people that this is the right way to do it, and for it to be more widespread and more in depth, so that it sustains.
If I can just give you an example, in the United States for 30 plus years, we've had a tool that was at the disposal of executives and leaders and presidents and whatnot, which was affirmative action, which was intended to be an opportunity for organizations to provide affirmative steps, positive steps that created access, created opportunity for people to advance in the organization. And just last year, that tool has been taken away in the United States. So that's no longer something that we have at our disposal. Well, there's nothing yet to replace it.
Yeah.
And so some people worry, and I think it's a reasonable worry, that will set back the objectives and the opportunities for diverse individuals to reach heights within organizations. And until we start to prioritize what's the thing that will replace that, how will we operate differently, we may actually retrench in ways that will be, I think, really problematic.
Okay. In India, there is the categories are a little different, right? So there you had race and ethnicity and gender. Here it is caste, and so it gets baked in. But that's also very hotly contested. It's very hotly debated, and there's a lot of back and forth on this. So what you said has resonance here, and people are contesting the exact same thing here too. So there's a lot of research that's happening in the West that has application here, but there's a lot of research that can happen here that we can also take back there. It'll be helpful.
Absolutely agree.
ISB is indebted to Wharton in a lot of ways. So when the school started as a partnership between Kellogg and Wharton, and my own host institution at that time, London Business School, joined in as a third party at that. But over the years, the school has benefited because of the visionary leadership that were exhibited by those two institutions, helping set up a place here, but giving autonomy. But at the same time, wherever help was needed, they were giving help. Can you tell us a little about what you think about international partnerships in particular when it comes to the Wharton School right now?
Well, first of all, let me say ISB might think that this partnership is important, but Wharton also thinks that this partnership is important. And it's been a real honor for me not only to have been a part of the ISB visiting faculty at one point earlier in my career and now come back 10 years and see the evolution of this school and how much it has really blossomed in powerful ways. So we're very grateful for the opportunity to engage with you all. I think that, as the world is becoming increasingly isolated, business schools and research universities have a particularly important role to play to help tether us to one another. And I think the ISB, Wharton, Kellogg, LBS partnership is just one example of that. Research and scholarship and the insights that come from that work fuel the ideas that create industry, ideas that go into policy decision across governments. And a lot of that work happens at institutions like ours. And so when we can come together as faculty and as scholars to do that work, I think it's increasingly important for the development of all society. I would also say that in addition to the research standpoint, there's the student standpoint. And we talk about diversity and inclusion. Well, it's only when we get outside of our own bubble, if you will, and we start to recognize how societies live and work and operate and function in different parts of the world that we create greater understanding and greater empathy. And that's also, I think, part of the benefit of diversity is that's where the most creative solutions come from, because you have people with different experiences coming together to solve a problem or to address an issue, to learn from one another, to recognize the humanity that exists around the world. Mm-hmm. And I know of no other institution that does that better and that has done that for as long as higher education. And so I think that is increasingly going to be important, and perhaps most important at a time when politically I think things are trying to tear countries apart.
Yeah. So Dean James, you saw it today, so you come into ISB. There's a student who comes running to you and wants to take a selfie with you, right? Because he's been following you on LinkedIn and he's been reading your writings and also the position that you have. So the world looks it's one of a handful of schools, 3-4 schools that are out there in the world, where we're looking for cues to see what are you thinking about how is business education going to evolve? What is the business school of the future going to look like? I know I'm just asking you to speculate on this, but it's important for the rest of us just to understand. So what do you think? What do you think about the future of business schools, and what do you think a business school of the future is going to look like?
Yeah. So you stated in an earlier question that India has a lot to learn from the US, but we have a lot to learn also from India. And my experience for the past 10 days that I've been in this wonderful country has indicated that that is absolutely true. Clearly I'll be meeting with folks here at ISB. I met with folks from Ahmedabad University, from one of the IIMs in Ahmedabad. And where business schools are going or need to go, I think absolutely is continuing with the foundational elements of business. So principles of accounting and finance and marketing and operations and management and whatnot. But also at Wharton, we're fortunate because we have ethicists on our faculty, we have engineers on our faculty, we have healthcare providers on our faculty. And again, seeing the interdisciplinary nature of education and business education in particular, I think is going to become much more characteristic of schools of the future. Okay. And I think it's through these partnerships where that can happen, but I also think it's even within, ISB is a standalone school, but within the American context, for example, most business schools exist within a broader university. And I think the more medicine and business, engineering and business, the arts and business come together, we're going to be a much more effective institution for business going forward. So I just think that the interdisciplinary focus has to be part and parcel to the future of business schools.
Okay. One of the really innovative things that you're doing is the Global EMBA program, right? It's also in very characteristic with your deep beliefs in diversity, because you want people from all over the world to be part of the classroom and benefit from, and also benefit others in the classroom. And that's the thinking behind this. Can you tell us a little about that thinking, right? So it's breaking geographical boundaries.
Yeah.
It's also temporal boundaries. So it's just breaking a lot of different boundaries there, right?
So for us, we call that program our Global Executive MBA program. And it was an outgrowth of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Like you and every other institution, we invested quite a bit in technology, and we invested quite a bit in developing our faculty to learn how to deliver content in different ways other than being residentially based. And so we outfitted new classrooms within the Wharton School that would allow us to reach people in a much more interactive way than you can get over, let's say, a Zoom technology, but it's really sophisticated technology, so you are simulating an actual classroom in real time. And in doing that, we recognized that when we created the Global Executive MBA program, and we found sweet spots of time zones that would allow people from around the world to log on in a synchronous classroom environment with a faculty member and members of their cohort in real time, that created opportunities for people who would never have been able to fly to Philadelphia or fly to any other place, but they can come together as a community. And that learning has been, the way in which those students are learning has been as compelling as what's happening in a residential format. We do bring them together a couple of times during their 2 years with us, but it has expanded who we can reach and who has access to education in ways that could never really have been done if we stick with only a residential format.
Yeah, I really think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And a lot of us are also going to pick up cues from that, right? Because we're saying that some of the boundaries that we had created in our own head about what can and cannot be done can be broken, which is what you're doing with that. Any last words that you'd have?
I do. I want to thank you, A, for the partnership between our two schools for so long, but B, for hosting me and several of our faculty who came to ISB earlier this week. I have had an opportunity to spend the better part of a week with 10 Wharton faculty who've spent the past 2.5 weeks traveling all over India. And to watch them learn and engage and have their eyes opened and think about new research opportunities, some in collaboration with your faculty, to think about opportunities for student exchanges. That has been such a rewarding part of my visit this time. And so it's been a real joy to be a part of India, ISB, and our ongoing partnership. So thank you.
Thank you. And I hope we'll see you in less than 10 years the next time. We
Absolutely.
shouldn't have a gap of 10 years.
I can promise you that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.